Hey, you're going to be okay. I'm Elizabeth May, and my functional health practice, Hey May, helps people heal when they've exhausted traditional options. When no one can figure out your health challenges, my team helps you resolve symptoms and restores your health. You're listening to my podcast where we'll hear stories of healing chronic illness from a root cause, immune-centered approach. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking a lot about when normal labs aren't the whole story and how really understanding functional immunology, chronic illness helped me to see a way out for Jamie and the current health struggles that she was facing. We're really going to walk through functional immunology and what happens when someone keeps getting sick and keeps being told, everything pretty much looks normal, but their body clearly isn't functioning normally. Jamie, today's guest, had already really established a solid foundation when it comes to nutrition. She was eating gluten-free and dairy-free and really taking good care of herself. She'd already done some good work in the past with another provider and really had a lot of good foundations, but that was not really holding her body up enough when it came to chronic infections and that immune dysregulation. This is such a classic example of how foundational nutrition matters really deeply, but sometimes the immune system is going to kind of call the shots and need more support. So, Jamie, I want you to share with us just one, welcome, but how you were totally not new to holistic health and kind of what got you into having worked on your health in previous seasons and, what got you to where you were as far as how you maintained your health.
Yeah, well, it's definitely been kind of a journey for me. And I know when I started with Abby and did our onboarding, a lot of things kind of clicked for me that I had this kind of lifelong, kind of these chronic issues, starting in childhood with recurrent ear infections, lots of antibiotic use in a time where the 90s was antibiotics for everything every other week. My teenage years, I feel is when I kind of started gravitating towards something different because I was always run down. I was always sick. I started with recurrent strep throat. I just knew that I didn't have the energy that I should as a teenager and my peers. So that's when I kind of first got into, first it was being a vegetarian, then it was being a vegan and dabbling in gluten-free and just kind of reading all of these kind of the hip trendy things. But that's kind of what piqued my interest, and everything I did, I kind of had a little bit of movement with. And then as I got older, in my 20s, the more recurrent strep, eventually having my tonsils out, which kind of lifted a huge burden off of my body at the time. And then at that point, I really transitioned to being gluten-free, dairy-free. Had a few years where I feel I was feeling pretty decent. And then I started with some chronic GI issues. I had this little flare of this urticaria out of nowhere. I would break out in hives anytime I was in the sun. Went to the doctor. It's stress. Stress was kind of the big thing I always heard. And it wasn't a very stressful period of my life. And I just kind of thought, all right, well, if nobody can help me, I have to do some other things, which is where I kind of just started my own research on nutrition, working with local providers. And again, I had a few good years. And then after I had my daughter, after pregnancy is when things kind of took a downturn again, went back to that kind of nutritional foundation that I had. And I felt everything that I did moved the needle a little bit, but not enough. And I worked with some really great providers that would get me a little bit further and just kind of keep me enough to where I was functioning, but wasn't 100%.
Yeah. When I listened to your story initially on our clarity call, I just kept hearing you were doing really great taking care of yourself, but it was a little triggering event here and there, or a big one. A birth of a child is definitely a big one, but even the tonsil piece, and there was some recurrent strep, and then there were stressors. Those are all triggers that really give the immune system a push down to where it's not going to continue maintaining resilience. And a lot of your symptoms were also very immune driven, hives, super immune driven. There was some GI stuff in there, again, immune systems regulating that. And there were just kind of changes that were always immune related, and those were easy things. And Did you feel like at that point, because you were doing stuff and you knew, hey, I'm doing stuff, I'm feeling better, I have tools that can help me get to a place. So you had a good solid foundation, but did you feel like there was like a lingering feeling that something deeper was going on and you just hadn't figured it out yet? Or like, what was kind of your internal, were you frustrated because you're like, I'm doing everything right, but I'm not getting there? What was that like?
Definitely, I had from even back when things kind of started flaring up in college. For me, I just always felt like there's. I know that there is something that is not right, and I just can't figure out what it is. And there was a period that it was like, okay, maybe it is stress and anxiety, and having to work through that. But very much so, I always felt like I'm feeling good doing all these things, but I feel like I should be feeling better. And I'm seeing other people doing these things and doing so much better than I am. Um, and then after having my daughter who didn't sleep until she was about 3 years old, it was like, okay, I'm tired, I'm not sleeping. It was always kind of these like justifications. And it wasn't until, I got really sick in 2004 or 2024 before working with you guys that it was like, okay, this is not normal. This is not my body's normal response to getting sick. And this is something more. This is something more going on for the way that I'm taking care of myself. And it almost kind of started this cycle of, well, why take such good care of myself if I'm going to feel like this anyways? I am going to, get the bag of chips during lunch, or, maybe that'll, kind of, make a difference, which it didn't. But you get kind of resentful after all of these years of doing these things, and just, I felt like I was getting worse instead of getting better.
Yeah. We clarity calls are a wild place because that's the point that we first engage with clients and they share with us like, I've done all these things and I've tried all these protocols and I eat really well and I've been doing this for years and no one's ever been able to fix me or help me or get any sort of something that's sustained and feels like a new foundation for my body. And that was same story for me. I mean, 10 years of working through chronic Epstein-Barr and GI stuff and bacterial things, but the immune system part's really what changed it. And your story kind of has that wonderful linchpin. You kind of have this like illness spiral. You mentioned 2024 with like the strep piece, and then it like literally just continued layered on. I remember doing your clarity call. You were like, and this, and this, and then this, and then this. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's so clear. But what was that timeline like for you when you were in that illness spiral?
So I was a stay-at-home mom for a few years, and I had recently gone back to work. So again, I was kind of in this, all right, I work, in a primary school building. Obviously, there's more germs. I have a small child. These justifications, right? And then starting off that 2024 school year, I mean, I think wasn't even the end of week one, and I was taking a sick day. And going to the doctor, and it was like, yep, it's strep. And I'm like, strep? Like, oh, well, you work in a school, and I used to get you're just a tired working mom. Everything's fine. You're a tired working mom. Um, and then I had I think I was sick October, November. Then in December, I remember going out for my husband's birthday and just sitting at dinner. I'm like, I am so tired. I cannot keep my eyes open. Something's wrong. And from that point on, it was about a month and a half of, so sick I couldn't get out of bed. Begging for blood work from my doctor, who again was, you're just a tired working mom. This is the latest virus. And I ended up having um, mono and walking pneumonia. So that was quite the recovery from that. And it was like, okay, maybe this is it. This is why I've been so sick. And then I think coming out of that, I had maybe 3 weeks of feeling okay. And then my whole house had flu A. And then that was about another month and a half recovery. And it was like, all right, well, your body's recovering slower because you have the mono. That's a chronic condition. And my mom had Epstein-Barr when she was about 2 months after I was born. So she was very familiar with that piece. And so I was trying to kind of connect the dots. Like, has this been my issue the whole time, this underlying, Epstein-Barr? And then again, another like 3 weeks of being healthy, and I would go back to work, and I'd work about 4 days, and I'd be back to being run down again. That like feeling like you're hit by a bus, joint pain, tiredness. And then I think I had about 3 more illnesses by the time I called you. And I remember it was like my daughter's nap time, and looking through things on Instagram and being sick and on another round of antibiotics, and just deciding to do the clarity call and just feeling so like like hopeless. Like, how am I continually getting sick and ending up in this cycle? So um, it was a very difficult time for sure, not being able to parent the way that I wanted to parent and be as active as I wanted to be, and balancing work and motherhood and being a wife and a friend. And there was a lot of balls dropped during that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember talking to you and you were like, I'm a school teacher. I have a small child. I continually am sick over and over again. But even your symptom review was just like, there was so much fatigue. There was also some emotional, like panic, anxiety, worry kind of stuff popping through, and irritability stuff that wasn't maybe your norm. And then there was stuff popping up during illness, like joint pain seemed to be more profound when you were sick. And those are always flags for me that like something else is popping through. You also live in New York, an area that's pretty endemic for bug-borne infection. And so that was something that was on my mind too. And you'd had, like, yours was pretty clear. You'd had the streppy stuff, you'd had flu, we'd identified several things that were there and hanging out. But it was like every time you got sick, your body kind of changed how it would respond after. Like, there definitely wasn't recovery. But for me, there were symptoms popping through that made me think, there's more here than just the things that we're identifying. And that's really where functional immunology becomes really important, because like a conventional labs and blood work, which we ran, like don't necessarily give you big red flags of like, this is what's wrong with you. But the patterns of symptoms, the patterns of your cyclical illness, and some pieces on your blood work that were deviated, for me, I heard chronic infection patterns immediately. So when I brought that up and said, I think there's more chronic infection here than the ones you've labeled, and probably bug-borne illness, how did that hit for you on the clarity call?
I remember getting off the call and talking to my husband. And again, I'd worked with practitioners. I had worked with a practitioner for my daughter when we were struggling, with some sleep stuff that I thought was some gut things. And we'd had these experiences, and there's always a cost to it. And him saying, he's like, "There's no way," and I'm like, there is absolutely. How would I would know if I had Lyme disease? There's no way. Um, and for about 3 days, we kind of mulled it over, like, is this worth doing the testing for it to just come back? I truly believed that it was just going to be mono, that it was just this lingering mono that was causing all of these issues. So I was certainly, for a point, like, there's no way I'm going to spend this money and it's going to be exactly what I thought that it was. And we had the conversation where he was like, you know what, we've done this a bunch of times and you get a little bit better and we're ultimately back where we are. And I want you to feel your best. But if we're putting all our eggs in one basket, like, do it, get all the testing, but like, this is it. If this doesn't work, we're going to have, at a point, you can only spend so much and do so much. And I was definitely, before working with you, kind of grasping at straws and doing other alternative things and colonics and just, different kind of buzzy, health things. Uh, and it was definitely, I had my doubts for sure. And when those test results came back, felt very validated, but very shocked at the amount of like co-infections I had as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is hard on this side to have that conversation, because we see this every single day. And because there are many of us practitioners in the group, like I get to observe loads of tests and loads of symptom load, which is cool because that helps me to be better at recognizing the pattern. And also, it's a little bit wild to tell someone on a clarity call, like, I know you've taken care of yourself. You found these good paths to help yourself. You're doing good things to help prop yourself up. Like, there's nothing wrong with the colonic. But if you need it on the regular, or it responds to you in a certain way, not saying either those were true for you, that tells me more. And to have the panel is costly that we run for infections. And I hate it. And I regularly talk with the company about ways that we could modify so it would be better, because it is such a powerful tool. And I think too, for someone who's been on a journey, it has to feel, for me, even when I found my infection load, and I'd had a tick bite at the time that I looked at mine, so it was more clear. It feels really validating, instead of the like run around and the I'm working really hard, but I'm not getting anywhere kind of a
Mhm.
thing. Yeah. A lot of your symptom burden too is kind of like all over the place. And we kind of talked about that a little bit, but there was like digestive IBS type of things, but there was also anxiety. Then there was fatigue, which makes sense with the Epstein-Barr. There was kind of that high B inflammation, histamine issues, the joint pain. And when we looked at infection load, I mean, we saw lots of things, right? Lyme was there. We saw several co-infections. The Bartonella was present. Definitely a viral load, which sometimes people will favor one or the other to where they're more bacterially challenged, which you had the strep history, you'd lost your tonsils. So I knew, well, it's probably not hanging out predominantly in the throat. It may have moved more to the GI and anxiety type expression. You'd had sinusitis stuff before, but you also had a viral load. We had plenty of Epstein-Barr there raging and hanging out chronically. Parvovirus was also common. And Abby and I actually joke a lot about developing a homeopathic for teachers because you all face the same stuff over and over again. If I'm taking a teacher into care, I know there's going to be strep, there'll be parvo. A lot of times there's going to be mycoplasma, which is a piece of what you had going on too. And we'll often see staph kind of stuff because kids have impetigo or other eczema, things like that. And you definitely had not all of that, but most of it. Yeah. And so how did you feel like starting the process and knowing that you'd been through other things? Now we've got this lab work and we're going to move into kind of a different sphere of function maybe, or not. What was that like for you in the beginning?
I think even just from the beginning, even the clarity call with you and the testing and just the amount of like thought and care that went into everything. And, we exchanged a lot of emails because I was very hesitant and very uncertain. One, because I didn't believe I had anything else going on other than mono. But it just, that felt different from the beginning, that I felt like I was finally working with somebody. And the other people I worked with along the way, along the 15 years I've kind of been in this, have been wonderful for what I needed at the time. But this felt very much like actual, like the real deal. I trusted the process. And even getting back the testing results was just like, this isn't just, an HTMA, which I had done in the past and thought was going to be all my answers, which super valuable for me at the time. But when there's deeper things, it just felt more cohesive to me. I was very apprehensive. Like I said, I've done things in the past. I had always felt like I was kind of sensitive to supplements. So I was really worried about how I was going to react to things, how I was going to feel. I felt very validated by everything. I remember my husband and my mom being like, wow, that's some really scary stuff. And I was like, I just feel good to know what we can deal with now when we have a plan. My biggest, I think, concern was feeling worse. And I used to talk to Abby about, like, I would start with, 2 drops of something instead of the full, 5 that I was supposed to, because I didn't want to go back to that place of feeling like I couldn't get out of bed, or, all I could do was work and then come home and that was it.
So with those fears, I know Abby tried to work into things slowly, and we talked about like what's the best way to do this. So one, like you needed to go to work practically, like you'd missed a lot of work, and you'd already you'd had the recurrent illness, and we were literally working against like you need to be at work as we work through this process. But we didn't jump into a huge protocol immediately. Did it feel like there was progress there in the beginning? I guess what did it feel like to start more gently than maybe gung-ho jumping into all the things at one time?
Yeah, I think a big piece too is like starting slow, but also really getting back to that, making sure I was eating 3 meals a day. A lot of my job, as a social worker in a school district, is going into homes, and we're in the car a lot, and we're on the road. And sometimes it is, stop at, like a Chipotle and get them in, when that was becoming my everyday, or skipping breakfast and just having coffee. So it was a lot of time to say like, okay, I'm dedicating this time. There's the financial piece. I really have to hone in on those foundations. So I think starting a little bit slower and working on those foundations for me were very important to get a routine and get a good baseline going. And, I did have some movement, especially with the anxiety piece, with just the supplements that we started early on before even doing the immunotherapy, because it took us a while to get there. I think my testing came back in June, and we didn't start immunotherapy until August, or no, end of September. Like, that's how long it took me to kind of work through the other things and get to a place where I felt like I had kind of built myself back up nutritionally enough to where I could like handle maybe taking a hit and not feeling great.
Quick break. If you've been curious about homeopathy, this is your sign to try it. At Hey Hey Homeopathics, we've created liquid remedies for everything from sleep and skin to digestion and beyond. Safe, gentle, and designed for real life. And if you're a practitioner, our preferred professionals line opens the door to powerful tools like no-sodes, miasms, detoxers, and more. Anyone can shop, but professionals can apply for exclusive access. Visit heyheyhomeopathics.com and start your path to natural healing today. Yeah. And I kind of love how you ended up doing it just from this side. One, we designed a care term to be X amount of time. Most clients start with 4 months because it's a time block that you can shore yourself up and commit again and renew yourself, to say like, okay, for 4 months, I'm going to get back to the basics. I'm going to do these things that I've been doing, but maybe haven't moved the needle. I'm going to invest in the process that way. But also, you've invested more in testing probably than you had before at any one time, and you've got a lot of skin in the game. But it's so helpful to have that beginning phase when we're doing drainage and we're working on detox, and also we're working on nourishment and repletion. And you, I think, really benefited from that quite a bit. Like in some ways, we were like, we hope she gets started. We hope she's coming back. But you were doing the work, and it really probably favored you too, that you buckled down and got back in there. And it really is, this work is wonderful. It is different. It's transformational, but it also gets you to a new foundation, and how high that new foundation is has a lot to do with how well you care for yourself, eat, rest, etc. And you were really doing that base work. And I think in that time too, you guys started with drainage and then just some histamine supports to give you like just some tools so that you weren't feeling junky. The high BPs can be supported. And then Abby also brought in carcinosin at that time. Would that be right?
Yes.
How did that feel just working through just the supplement parts? Anything that you noticed or remember or notable?
So we started, I had tried to kind of time it. So we started on our summer vacation, so I had those 9 weeks to kind of rest and, play with things and see what side effects or symptoms might be. And even just after a few weeks of doing the drainage, which like I said, I, stayed on 1 drop for a full week, then 2 drops for a full week, just to really, and I think the highest I got up was 6 or 7. I couldn't seem to go beyond that. But even then I noticed just a little bit more clarity. I didn't have as much fogginess as I did. The anxiety had become such a huge piece for me. I have always, my whole life had this anxiety, but it had definitely ramped up in the last couple of years. And I think that was part of the hesitation was starting the supplements was the anxiety and after a few weeks of the carcinosin, it was like, all right, something has shifted and I don't know what exactly it was. And I'm kind of glad we kind of did things piece by piece because we were able to really say like, hey, I think this is really moving things. This is an important one to stick with and stay on. And I kind of was like, if I'm busy and I'm going to forget something, it's not going to be it's not going to be this one. And really, by the time I went back to work, I hadn't even started the immunotherapy yet, but I was having more energy. I just felt better. I felt more rested. I definitely felt less anxiety for sure. I was able. There were things that I used to worry about. And care about that just didn't phase me as much anymore. Feeling like I kind of had to do it all was kind of a big thing with me is I have to do everything and I have to do everything perfectly. And I noticed with that, it kind of helped me release some of that. And that's been one of, the best changes, I think.
Yeah, I loved watching your story from over here because you worked with Abby on our team, who's wonderfully gifted human, but she's a wonderful homeopath. She's also a pharmacist, and she obviously does this work. And she has really led and challenged our team a lot in using homeopathy in different ways. And so I want to speak a little bit to that for a second because carcinosin is a miasmatic homeopathic. So we think of homeopathy as tools that can come in and support us with acute issues. We also use homeopathy in our immune rebuilding processes. But miasms are really there because they are addressing your energetic tendency towards being predisposed to a particular group of illnesses. These are things that maybe we inherit or acquire in our lifetime. One of the most notable and easy to understand is carcinosin. It really helps to address people who have cancer in their family line. We all probably immediately think of somebody where there's lots of cancer, an aunt and uncle, mom and dad, all the way back. But that also means for that person, they have a particular kind of way that their body trends. Someone who can benefit from a carcinosin miasm tends to have favor a viral load. They may have a history of mono or childhood illness or repeated immune compromise. They may have poor boundaries or just be a people pleaser, helper, nice, really doormat, wonderful person to be around, but burn the candle at both ends and really struggle with that fatigue stuff. Lyme may be part of their presentation. They also can tend to struggle when they get mono. They don't just get it, they get it all the way, where there's more bedbound, exhausted, really, really struggling. So the person who the carcinosis and miasm is a match, really, they're often overachieving, very perfectionistic, want to do everything well. Not necessarily a bad thing, but that's kind of the disposition that it matches. And your case is so interesting because as a practice, we tend to practice clinical homeopathy. And people who are familiar with or learning about homeopathy often learn about classical homeopathy. And with classical, we tend to choose one remedy, and that tries to match the totality of a person's symptom as closely as possible. And instead of using that classical remedy to get movement on a various group of, like, if you had a bee sting, you would use apis, or if you had pain, we would use arnica. If we are able to find and select the appropriate classical remedy for that person that's the most matched, like cures like, the most like Jamie's case, then you can really use that remedy to get movement on almost anything. And so that is always our goal in care, to listen and try to find a simillimum, is what they're called, the remedy that most closely matches. Oftentimes when there is recurrent illness, like with you, carcinosin will either be their miasm for sure, and sometimes it can be a simillimum. But it's a great example because, yeah, early on, before you even got to the process, you were doing so much better than most people do in their drainage phase. And that was totally credit, really, to that carcinosin simillimum match that Abby brought into care. And that's not something that we can always do with everyone. We're not always, we're not trained as classical homeopaths, so we have training in that. But it definitely was a remedy that matched your totality and got a lot of movement for you. And it's a remedy that we use regularly with our clients because we deal with so much immune dysfunction support, and it can be wonderful there. So really, it was just fun for us to see because it really did make big movement for you. And it's interesting too because it makes big movement on many levels. So it's not just the immune part, but it was also emotional. I mean, carcinosin has been so helpful to me for bringing like emotional calm and peace and boundaries. Like, it's very interesting to watch someone work through it because it does, as a boundary support, it also informs that immune boundary. It helps your immune system to get strong and know, like, what's Jamie's body and what's viral and bacteria stuff that the immune system should be purging. And it's just it was a great remedy in general, but great to kind of watch. So early improvements before the pathogen work, that was happening. Your body had already started shifting. Some things I saw in your notes, you used to kind of feel like bad 4 or 5 days of the week, and you'd really shifted towards having like really good days solidly for like 3 or 4 days of the week. And I think you'd gone all summer. Did you go all summer without illness at that point?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. And that was huge because your illness layers were like from the fall before, really, until we started getting going on things. When we started immune therapy, let's talk about that. How did that phase go for you? Because you were still, you were feeling better. Was the fear still there around like, am I going to feel worse once I start this part of the process? Or where were you kind of emotionally at that point?
For sure. I think, when I had felt as bad as I felt for really, looking back, it was, I was sick that year, but the 2 to 3 years before that, I had really been feeling quite awful. So to finally be feeling good, to then like have to jump into something where there might be days where it kind of flares up those old symptoms, I definitely kind of pushed that back. I remember I was supposed to start in September, and I was like, oh, well, I have my first week of school, so let's wait a week, and then another, and I was in a wedding, and I just tried to time it so it would work smoothly in my life. And definitely the anxiety was still there, and I was like, all right, this is like, you got to do it, this is it. And once I started, the first round, the first boxes, there were days that I felt great, and there were days that I didn't feel so great, but it was not even half as bad as what I was feeling when I was sick. So it ended up being very manageable for me. And I was pleasantly surprised and was kind of like, all right, well, we should have done this in May, and I would have been halfway through it by now. But I think that that's the approach that kind of I needed to take to feel comfortable and to be able to function. Um, but yeah, it was overall, I mean, everything was a great experience. I can't say that there was ever a day where I was like, oh my God, I can't go to work because I feel so terrible, which is kind of what I was expecting. And that was not my experience at all.
Yeah. So in that process, just for the listeners to know, as we work through immune therapy, there's often expression of the pathogen. So with Epstein-Barr, you may have days where your throat feels sore and you feel kind of run down and tired. But for most people, those are glimmers of the immune system addressing the virus, never like a full expression of the issue. And even during that time period, I was looking through notes, your daughter got sick at one point and you got a really solid fever. And I think that was kind of like a celebratory point almost for you. Do you remember that?
Yeah, so initially, I was sick in December. So now I was sick so little this year that I'm having to think. And I remember being excited because it was the first time that I got sick, and I felt the way my body used to feel when I got sick. So I had a sore throat, I lost my voice. I wasn't feeling well, but I could go to work. I, went out, with a couple of friends, and I didn't have to cancel plans. And it was like, oh my God, I feel like I just have a cold, and I hadn't had a normal cold that didn't take me out for a week or two in so long. Like that was exciting to me. And then I had a relatively good January, February. End of March, my daughter did get sick. She came home. She tested positive for strep and flu B, and that was definitely a bit of an anxiety spiral for me because I was still working through that strep piece of the immunotherapy, and I was like, oh my God, is this going to mess anything up? And how is my body going to respond? And that was definitely that sickness was a little bit harder. Definitely hit harder. But I utilized a lot of like the homeopathy to get me through that, which was great. And there was a few instances where I mean the fever was just getting too high and I was too uncomfortable that I had to take an ibuprofen or a Tylenol. But even getting that far and not having to use traditional like cold medicine or pain relievers, that had been since I think the June before, like, was a huge victory for me to look back and go, oh my God, I've made it 8 months and I haven't needed these things. I've been able to utilize things that I've learned, like red light and just different homeopathic options. So just my illnesses this year were a totally different experience than prior.
I love that. It's such a not silly, but like huge thing because it's like a practical everyday, like to live knowing you're probably going to get sick once or twice this month and you have to modulate life and kid care all the time. And those sort of things is hard and discouraging. But we also are really excited to hear that you got sick and had a fever because having that fever means that your immune system was more regulated. And knowing that she was dealing with strep, so you were dealing with at least exposure and your body did more of an appropriate response, told us, okay, Jamie's immune system's like actually functioning better because a regulated immune system doesn't mean you never get sick. That's actually not good either. It means that you're responding appropriately and recovering well. And we were finally seeing that. You weren't having lingering stuff after or taking forever to get better or moving from one infection to the next. And that was like a big turning point. And really, that's one of the things, too, that as you get further and further away from the process, that immune resilience stays. And clients all the time are like, I've never gone this long without being sick or knocked down by every little thing. And teachers, school workers, anyone who's around lots amount of kids, daycare workers are my favorite because y'all are more exposed than the rest of us to all kinds of, every little bitty thing. And it's always really interesting to see how the immune resilience really shows up and builds over time. And you do get to kind of like maintain a foothold in staying well and not dipping every time someone blows strep in your face, which is kind of what's happening there. And I think it was cool too because the strep didn't show up, but you didn't have your tonsils, but it didn't bring like a big GI response for you or the typical throat situation. And your anxiety was much different than too, because that's a streppy piece. There was concern around sickness, but I didn't see as much like, big worry, anxiety around.
Yeah. I think when I made it past, the first few days and, I knew I was sick. I got hit pretty hard and was down hard. I was like, all right, let's make sure we don't have strep. And, Abby and I had talked about some things we could do. And I got, some of the strep wheel back on board that I had been using. And when I got through it without getting it, like that was a huge victory. Like, at first I was discouraged that I had gotten as sick as I got with the flu, but it was like, you know what? That's a normal response. My kid came home, the entire class is sick, but I didn't get the strep. Like, and I made it through, and that was a huge moment there for sure. And then, like you said, to then now be, a month and a half out from that, and we haven't, knock on wood, had anything else yet, which, like I said, working at a primary school and then also having a kindergartner at home, there's lots of I get it from both ends. There's lots of, fun things that come home. So it's definitely been a big victory for that.
Yeah. So less sickness, feeling more energy, not having to miss work. How about the food piece and the food portion of things? Because you were good at taking care of your body, but I do feel like there was a lot of food. Like it was a strong tool for you to manage some wellness. Like where are you at this point with eating out, or are you still dairy gluten free? Like what is your level of food management at this point that you feel like you need?
I think when I started with Abby, I definitely had a lot of food fear going on, just from different, elimination diets and things that I had done throughout the years to try to um, fix issues or things with other practitioners that I can't have. I was strict paleo for a while. I can't have beans, and I never reintroduced those because at a point in my journey when I did reintroductions, they went horribly. So those foods that I had eliminated just have stayed eliminated for years and years now, because my body, looking back, obviously wasn't in a place where I had accomplished what I needed to. So that was a big piece working with Abby too. It was like, all right, I need to eat better and I need to eat more because I'm definitely under nourishing. So we made a lot of progress on that. I am back to incorporating beans in my diet, which is a huge, it's a huge thing for me just to be able to have more freedom, more options to eat. Even vegetable, broccoli, cauliflower, things like that. I could maybe have, two or three little florets, and any more than that, I would have an issue. And yesterday I did like a sausage, potato, broccoli sheet pan, and it wasn't even a thought of how much broccoli am I going to eat? How do I have to ration this so I feel well? So big progress with that. I do think I still have a ways to go with that, more things I would like to reintroduce. I am still gluten and dairy free. For me, the gluten, it's been on and off for 15 years. That's something I will probably stick with forever. I would love to try to get dairy and eggs back in at some point. I don't know that I feel like my body's at a place where it's ready for that. I think I definitely still have some more work to do. I think we tackled a huge piece, and now there's lots of things I can do to kind of refine things. But the food fear is not as big of a factor as it used to be, for sure. And even going to, I think I had told Abby, Thanksgiving was huge. I went to a local gluten-free bakery, and I got a stuffing, and I got gluten-free rolls, things that I just would have been too afraid to eat. And for the first time in years, had like stuffing with my Thanksgiving dinner, and gluten-free apple pie, and just things that would have totally sent me into like an anxiety spiral of, am I not going to feel good? And I feel like the carcinosin was big in that for me too, and kind of helping with a lot of my anxiety surrounding food too. So definitely big movement with what I am able to eat and not having as many digestive reactions.
If you've been wanting to transform your health but don't know where to start, I've got you. My full color cookbook is much more than recipes. It's a 300-page crash course in healing through food. You'll get 125 plus gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free meals the whole family will love, plus step-by-step guides on shopping smarter, improving digestion, and making your kitchen a healing place. It's gorgeous, practical, and designed to make healthy living simple. Grab your copy at heyheymay.com/cookbook and start changing your health one delicious bite at a time. that the broccoli piece, just to kind of expand, because some people may hear and be like, but what's the problem with the broccoli? Well, when you've got, bacterial overgrowth going on GI wise, high fiber foods can be really hard to digest, and they can be something that promotes a lot of that like bloating and therefore upset. And depending on how much bacterial overgrowth your body's dealing with, it can really be something that bothers you quite quickly. There's also a sulfur component that can affect how the liver is able to like process or push processing of things. So that's definitely a piece that maybe like most people don't realize, but those high fiber veggies, high sulfur veggies can be something that triggers. The eggs part you mentioned is interesting too. And I agree definitely on gluten. Same for me. That's not something I have been willing yet to reintroduce or give a try. I do have genetic pieces, like I have the HLA genes that are there, and I don't think we figured that out for you yet. But there are parts where some portions may stay out. But eggs are one of those things that cross-react a lot with Epstein-Barr, and they're high in arginine, and so they can be a trigger for EBV progression. And we always say too, like as someone, there's other reasons too. Sometimes eggs will be reactive for their own immune reasons. We work with a lot of children that have egg allergies, for example. Um, Also within mold, if that's an issue, that can be cross-reacting. But as you retain that immune resilience over time, eggs will be an easier introduction because the Epstein-Barr portion that's been raging is now going to be in control, and there's less opportunity for that cross reactivity or for the high arginine foods to push that EBV progression. It's all nuanced and all layered, and all things, are definitely intertwined. But those sort of things are part of the long game. When we get through that immune therapy process, we typically want clients to like hang and enjoy your new freedom and enjoy feeling well and know that your immune system's been trained, and now it's walking out those plans. And the further and further you get away from the progress, the more strong your immune system is, the more resilient it will remain, and the more likely you are to not have really issue when you bring things back in. So that's one of those things that sometimes people, it's an action item, right? Because in the beginning we're like, I can't do this, or this food, and I want them all back. We want you to get them all back too. And I mean, you clients at large, and some of it is a quick thing where you're like, beans are super high fiber. For you to be able to tolerate those is like, great progress in that same dynamic. And also things that interact with some of the pathogen load, we have to kind of leave for a little later or when we're comfortable. And I always think too, it's great to enjoy the new bodily freedom that we found in this, because after being like buckled down on a lot, there are belief systems and worries that we can release, but it takes time to do that. And food is so integrated into so many parts of our life. Those early, I say, in the process moments of getting to have an apple pie and stuffing and enjoy holidays and not have to modify every gosh darn thing because of our bodies is like so enjoyable to enjoy. And it's nice to be able to stay and hang there with that and then know that there's more hope for moving other foods back in. But looking back now and kind of walking through this discussion today, what do you feel like feels the most different about being in your body, like on this side of things?
Um, I think for me, it's the lift of like the fog and the clarity that I feel like I have now. I feel much more myself than I think I have felt in a very long time. And I've had my mom, my husband, people comment that like you seem like yourself again. You don't seem you seem like you're there. And there were times I would wake up and I just would be like I'm not with it. I don't know what is going on, but I am not with it. And my brain just had this lag. So even beyond just having the energy, like something as simple as just working, coming home, making dinner, and then still having the energy to like run up to Target to get, just whatever I need to, right? Something for my daughter for school, or things that used to be just such a huge monumental, like to go to the grocery store for a year and a half, all I could do was grocery pickup. And I am someone who I love to go to Whole Foods and wander around the grocery store and just kind of see what there is. And that was something, if I did that, my body was wiped out for the rest of the weekend. So just to have those little things that I feel like we kind of take for granted before we're sick or experience something like this, just those normal everyday, the energy to like live a full functional life and feel like I can have a conversation and that I am present, I think is the biggest, aside from not feeling as sick as I felt, that is the biggest thing.
Hmm. What do you wish more people understood about chronic illness? Because you had a really long season of like literally just being sick over and over and over again with things. And it's hard when you don't experience that or you don't really like know that firsthand. But what do you wish others like understood about that and just immune dysfunction in general?
That was kind of a running joke at work is every time I'd get sick, I'd be like, "Oh, Jamie's going on vacation again," and it's just it's not a fun time. It's definitely I can understand how when people have some chronic issues that you can't see or you look like you're functioning like a regular person or oh everybody gets tired that it's different. It is a different kind of tired. It is a different type of it's not a cold. It's not something that you can rebound from. And I think just people understanding that it's not anxiety, it's not laziness. It is just this like to your core, tiredness that you can't shake that and realizing how much people struggle with having to say no to plans or disappointing somebody because you can't show up to a party or you have to cancel dinner or um, that people really do need to rest and take care of themselves to overcome that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that I dealt with was just people not taking it seriously. And when you've been sick so chronically, you just kind of become the person that never feels good. Like, oh, well, that's Jamie. That's typical. She never feels good, or she always cancels, or
Yeah.
and that's something after all of this going through all this to work through like I believe therapy has been a huge piece too because it's one thing to get these results and feel validated and then it's another thing to work through feeling well again and trusting your body and knowing how far you can push things and what you can say yes to and when you need to take a step back and take care of yourself and find that new balance and not identifying in that chronic illness anymore.
Yeah. I always compare it to it's like getting a new car. Like you had your old car and you knew how to roll up the window just right and you knew how to like keep it from that one floor mat smelling weird and where you kept all your lipstick and where how you kept it from, going off the road when it snowed. And then you get a new car and you're like, okay, so I can drive this one just fine when it rains. Like the tires are gonna not slide on the road and like the window just goes up and down, but then like my purse doesn't fit in here the same way the other one did. Okay, you're learning and adapting in a new body, but also like it generally does the same thing, but it does it way better with way less effort, with way more ease and more comfort. And that part, sometimes we get through this process with clients and they're like, okay, thank you so much. I feel great. I'm done. But the emotional part of it is really big, especially when you've been the person who's had to adapt or be afraid, or you've even had good, like food modification. Food is such a good tool, but it is so easy for us to even move full blown to orthorexia or somewhere in the middle as we learn for it to be a helpful tool. And because we eat 3+ times a day, that's a hard thing for people to work through. And that emotional piece and the mental work that really just truly is diligence inside of ourselves to question and say, like, I'm really okay with the broccoli. Like I should probably try and do 6 pieces of broccoli and just like give it a go. Or maybe I should just go to dinner and just see if I can go out tonight with my friends and see how tired I am later. And like just challenging yourself, trying to write out that new body part is really important and reframing that like I'm in a new place, I'm safe, like I am healthy. It's definitely hard to believe a lot of times after you've struggled with illness for so long. Um, and sometimes hard to challenge some of those social, not that anybody's doing anything wrong. They were just used to functioning with us in certain ways when our bodies were unwell. But to change that social, even in marriages, we've had spouses that like both hop on the call and they're like, I just realizing like how she can like do stuff now and she couldn't do things before. And then I'm also realizing when I was expecting her to do stuff, she was actually like bone tired, not just not wanting to. And it's interesting and sad and freeing how much illness can affect and touch all parts of our life. And if you're not in a body experiencing that, it's really weird to interact with and not know. So I think too about how many things you were doing well. And I wonder what you would say to somebody who's doing all the right things, but still struggling at this point now that you've gone through this process and lived many years of doing all the right things and then having a transformation.
Well, I think now after going through this process, just saying to somebody, I mean, I've said to many people who've been struggling, like, hey, I know that this is a big time commitment, it's a financial commitment, but it's if you're doing all of these things, like there's more. And I think that some people still have that very traditional view of medicine. And especially me with the testing that I did with you guys from the Lyme, I had a few comments like, well, was that from a real doctor? Are you sure that's real? In kind of dealing with that like, hey, if you're doing all the right things, you're not getting anywhere with this traditional care system, to take the leap and to question, why am I eating healthy and exercising and I'm so exhausted and nothing is moving the needle, that maybe there is something deeper going on. Because I feel like that's the biggest thing that I've learned through all of this is to question and to see, what is could be at the root of it. Because it's not, I think we get so comfortable just being sick all the time, or everybody feels this way, or everybody's tired, or everybody is over functioning and overwhelmed, and that's just how you have to adapt and you have to be. So to kind of question that and look at, how can you function differently and what supports do you need?
I think that traditional medical system part is important because when you have chronic stuff and you didn't carry a lot of diagnoses when you came in care, that you easily could have been in that boat just with history. But people come in with like several autoimmune diseases stacked, and the rheumatologist has said this, or there's no answer for you here. There's no answer at dermatology. There's none at cardiology. There's none at all these places. And it is really hard to think that like, oh, someone else who's not an MD or specialist could have something to add to this equation. And I like to compare it to the grocery store. Like, I never walk into my Kroger expecting them to have the random wonderful daikon radish that I'm going to turn into part of our like sushi night. And I'm definitely not showing up there looking for the organic juice sparkling water, because they're not going to have it. I'll be needing to go to Whole Foods for that. Just like if I want the cheap avocados, I'm definitely going to the little grocery store in my little town and I'm going to get them from there. Like, not every place is meant to serve everything. And a big part of what we do here at Hey Hey is like, we do address a lot of issues, but all of those issues go back to the immune system and that functional immunology piece that informs how allergies work, how skin stuff works, how digestive, how recurrent mental health, how infectious stuff works. It all goes back to the same thread, and it's just a different way of thinking of it. And really, it is neuroscience, and it often takes 15 to 20 years for neuroscience to hit traditional big giant systems with standard of care and lots of outlines. And so I think it takes a lot of bravery. It took a lot of bravery for me. I didn't come from a family that was like, we're conventional kind of people, to challenge and think outside the box. But my goodness, it's totally what saved my life. And I saw functional doctors that were wonderful and helpful, and some gave me pieces, and I saw nutritionists that gave me pieces. But this piece for me and for you was the thread that really pulled everything together and got us well. On that chronic illness note, the question I always ask, because it is in some ways a unique experience, and then going through this process is unique, and you kind of talked about it, even people questioning and, having things to say. What is one way that you were loved well during this process, either as you had chronic illness or as you were healing? How were you supported well by others in that process?
The biggest thing that comes to mind is, I mean, I had so many friends and family that were wonderful, but my mom was just such a huge support in never making me feel guilty for being too tired to function, and kind of really picking up the slack for me, where it was seamless. For my daughter, of course, my husband was wonderful, but he works, and there's, I am the drive to school, the pick up from school, the all of those things, make dinner, and for her to take over, taking my daughter to school and making it fun for her and playing with her after school, so I could get myself together, take a minute, or taking her for dinner nights that I was just too, I was too tired and my husband was working late. The support and knowing that my child was taken care of and wasn't missing a beat, that was huge. That was huge for me. And then also just a couple of friends who really just kind of trusted the process with me and didn't make me feel silly or stupid for trying something different. Where, I had conversations with people where, that wasn't the reaction. I mean, people, my dad was definitely very skeptical, for sure. And that was tough to just say, you know what? I mean, what do I have to lose? What do I have to lose doing it this way? Because it's not working the other way for me, and I can't function like this anymore, right? I want to have a shot at, um, feeling better, and I think this is it, and I believe in it. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and that's it. But definitely the support of my mom for making meals and picking up groceries for me, and then my husband was really great too at never making me feel guilty for not being able to do something or having to sit something out or leave early, or him having to, me saying like, hey, I know I try to do everything myself, but like this, I need you to take this over now.
Hmm.
And him not making me feel bad for that. And being able to go to bed right at 8 p.m. right after, my daughter did, and, doing bath time and bedtime and those kinds of things. So definitely the support, for sure, of just, those daily tasks.
That's really good. And I think too, even listening to that, like probably there was some growth for you in there and passing things off and saying, can you handle this? I can't handle this part of
Hmm.
the season because I am handling a new part of my health or moving forward. And just thinking about boundaries and carcinosin and immune systems, that's a good and helpful growth part of the process too,
Hmm.
that you wouldn't think of, is like you do have to learn how to redraw new boundaries, give yourself space, care for yourself, and also challenge yourself at the same time to continue growing. And I agree. The outside voices are hard, but I also think too, like a lot of times they'll say, well, how's what you're doing working for you? Because I'm not talking to well people on clarity calls. It's always people who are still struggling with a big part. And it's hard. I feel for that because so many have been to so many places and gotten little bits of growth. And it's hard to believe that like this thing could actually be more helpful to me in like many layered ways than before. But it's there. But the support piece is huge because it is a process and it is work, but it is some of the best work I think you can do if you are struggling with recurrent illness situations. So I really appreciate you sharing and opening up about all the parts. I've always felt like seeing your own story and someone else's story is the biggest tool for change because it basically activates hope and gives people a way to see a way out. And I just appreciate you being, open and telling us all the things and sharing all the parts. And I also can't wait to continue to see when you eat eggs and as you keep
Yeah.
progressing from this side.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for letting me share my story. It's been a really great experience. And there was a lot of time that I spent looking at your Instagram and listening to your podcast. And, it truthfully had been a couple of years of thinking, should I take this leap? And, I think intuitively I kind of had a feeling for quite a while. So it's been a really great life changing experience, for me, for sure.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad you took the leap. I always love to hear too um, how long people have been contemplating or watching or thinking because it's just interesting to me to see um, how long we think about and what makes us move to do the change or trust the new process, which is such a huge thing. So really glad that you took the leap and that you got to be where you are now at this point, and hopefully this season is going to be behind you and open up new doors for you. So thanks for your time, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you're leaving encouraged, curious, and hopeful. If you learned something, I'd love for you to share this episode with a friend. Hey, we are all healing together. You can learn more about my practice, our team, and what it's like to work with us at heyheymay.com. I teach lots on Instagram and answer questions there each Monday. My Instagram handle is at heyheyelizabethmay. You can watch these podcast episodes and more on our YouTube channel, Hey Hey May. Learn about and enjoy our homeopathic line and take our homeopathic short course at heyheyhomeopathics.com. Happy healing!